Good evening, everybody, backcountry fans. My name is Caroline Gleich, and I am a backcountry and Patagonia ambassador. I'm a professional ski mountaineer. I'm based in Park City, Utah, and tonight I'm going to have a talk. With fellow Patagonia ambassador Zahan Billimoria, and we're going to talk about his recent film, Solving for Z. So we're going to talk a little bit about risk management and decision making in the mountains, and I'm really excited to talk to Z about this because he has tons of experience, and I'm just getting this live dialed up right now. So yeah, he has tons of experience. The film Solving for Z, it answers these questions. Hey Z, how's it going?
What's up, Caroline? How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Great, really good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I was just explaining the questions your film answers. And so to introduce Z, he's a full-time mountain guide, a ski mountaineer, a father of two, husband, fellow Patagonia ambassador. And the film, I love this description. How much can we gain from the mountains? How much can we lose? Between our own perceptions and the reality of hazards, how much space exists? And in that gap, how do we decide what we are willing to risk? And so let's just jump into it. Z, I was wondering if you could just tell us quick, like, what are some of your proudest ski mountaineering accomplishments?
Let's see. I mean, I don't know if I really feel like pride is honestly what I feel around what I do in the mountains. The way I feel about it, especially after coming through 2020, which was a year where we saw how much hardship there is in our country and the world. And I think it really just reminded me that like skiing is this thing that I get to do, and how lucky am I to get to do it. And I think that kind of is really how I feel about skiing, and being in the mountains is more like what a privilege it is. And I feel more of that than I do feeling like, wow, I'm so proud of things I've done, you know?
Yeah, I love that answer so much. Like, so many things that you've said or taught me over the years have really stuck with me. And yeah, I remember like over 10 years ago, I took a course with you in the Tetons, this ski to live camp. And the lesson that Nat taught me and that you taught me was pride is the number one thing that kills ski mountaineers, you know, being too proud to ask for a ski belay. And so I really appreciate that answer. Thank you. And so let's jump into it and talk about loss, because I know your film really talks about that and goes into that. And so we both lost some people very close to us from avalanches and mountain accidents. And can you tell me more about how that's changed your risk tolerance or decision making in the mountains?
Yeah, definitely. You know, the first real big experience of loss for me was when my friend Ray Landon passed in 2010 on the South Teton. That was over 10 years ago now. And it's strange in some ways, because when I look back over the last 10 years, I've certainly done the riskiest things since Ray has passed.
Yeah.
Where I would think, and maybe others also would feel like, well, you would experience loss and then you would reduce your risk afterwards. But that's not really how it has happened for me. When Ray died, it definitely set me back. And there were years, and I think it's fair to say it was years, when I really felt very hesitant about going back into the mountains. And I really questioned whether I would at some points on that journey.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the experience that I was looking for was a risky experience, and I continued to pursue that. I think some of the things that changed is I just became in the years after Ray died, I became very studious. You know, I became very like, I got to immerse myself in the study of this environment, and I got to understand it better, and I got to close that gap that is the element of the unknown, and I've got to try to narrow that. And that was really my focus in those years, which coincided with trying to elevate my guiding and just becoming a more astute student of the mountains.
Yeah, well, thanks for speaking to that. And I'm holding space for other people that have lost friends in avalanches or mountain accidents, because You know, I lost my half brother to an avalanche when I was 15 before I'd ever stepped foot in the backcountry. And so I approached it similarly to you. Like, I really strongly wanted to become a backcountry skier, but I wanted to also make sure that I was really knowledgeable in how I approached it. And so I still think bringing that attitude of humility and always learning, I think that's such a great mindset to bring into the mountains all the time. So I was curious on a personal level, for all parents out there, how do you balance your role as a father and a husband with being a mountain guide, guiding in the Tetons, which are, you know, that's some big terrain you have up there?
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know, I had my kids really early on. Like I had both of my kids in my 20s.
Oh, wow. I did
And
not know that.
yeah, I had my kids in my 20s, so I've got a high schooler now. Which is new territory in our household, but it's awesome. So, and I really only fully came to a point where I was totally immersed in the mountains at the same time, roughly, which is really different, right, than a lot of how other people pursue it, where they like have this personal life and then they bring children into that. And then they're like, oh, well, I used to act like this. How should I roll now? For me, that never happened because they both happened at the same time.
Right.
That was really countercultural then, and it's still really countercultural now. But it worked great for me. You know, I just never imagined that I would have a life without children. So Kim and I were really just like, let's go, let's get it going on. Let's bring some children in and just figure it out as we go. There were some great aspects to that because I had my kids when I was young and I had a lot of energy, and that was awesome. But I was also broke as a joke for a long part of that, and that's part and parcel of like trying to raise a family and do a job that's, you know, for the early years was hardly even a job. I mean, it was really hard to scrape together.
Yeah.
It's different now. Guiding has changed a lot, but it's that's really hard for me to answer. I don't really, it's hard for me to get perspective on how I do that. Yeah, I mean, it's been a risky journey, you
Yeah.
know. I've had far too many moments in the mountains where it could have all ended, and that might seem really irresponsible. I get that. I don't really have a answer for that. You know, it's just I've chosen the journey I've chosen, and I've said no to a lot of things. You know, like people often ask, like, you know, have you been to the Himalayas? My family's originally from that part of the world, from the Himalayas. I've never been, you know, and that those are opportunities that I'm like, it just doesn't make that much sense for me to be gone from my kids for such a long period of time. So there's certain things that, you know, haven't been a part of my life that maybe would have. But I'm good with all that. You know, I got the enormous joy of like having these kids and having the role of being a dad, which is my favorite part of my life by far.
Yeah.
And also, you know, just pursuing my passion in the mountains at the same time. So,
Well, that's really cool. And maybe now that your kids are older, you could maybe do a trip there with them. Like, I was really inspired following Hillary Nelson when she took her kids to base camp, and other like great ski mountaineers who've done that with their children. So that's super cool. I really appreciate you speaking to that because it seems like a difficult transition to parenthood. And, you know, life, it has risks too of not following your passion, and you could end up with cancer or a car crash. And so I think it's really wise what you said to follow your path and to stay true to that. Okay, so maybe as a little educational piece, you could.
and actually, can I jump in there
Yeah.
with one thing, because you brought something up that I think is a really good point, right? And that is about this whole idea of risk and whether there is such a thing as appropriate risk.
Right.
And whether that idea of appropriate risk applies to everybody the same. And ultimately, I really don't think it does. And I think that, you know, we live in a society where our risk tolerance is very controlled, right? Because, you know, if you drive too fast, if you don't wear a seatbelt, if you don't put a helmet on your motorcycle, whatever, like there's all these different elements of our life in society. In fact, all of our life in society is completely governed by other people's ideas of what appropriate risk is for us. And we have to operate within that. You know, you could say, well, what does it matter to anybody else if I wear a seatbelt? That's my choice. But in society, it's not your choice, or at least not legally, right? And that's what's so rad about the mountains, is there are no rules. It's a place where human beings can go back into their natural habitat and be free and do as they please, and like ski a slope if that's what they are willing to gamble, or not ski a slope, you know, or climb a mountain or not climb a mountain. And it's like the ocean. There's these very few places left in society where we get to choose how much risk we want to take. And that's what's so special about the mountains. And that's part of what I'm really passionate about, is making sure that we don't bring that like governing risk idea into the mountains and apply it to everybody and say, you're an idiot because you chose to ski that, and I wouldn't have chosen to ski that. So if my risk is different than your risk, then you must be wrong. And I'm like, no, that's not what the mountains are about.
Right. Yeah. On the, like, I totally, this is something you've said that stuck with me, because I think you also said in one of our Patagonia calls that we need to be really conscious of not shaming or judging other people. I think that's 100% spot on, because there's, like, with COVID too, it's just magnified like tension and stuff. And I think, you know, to bring that kindness and compassion to, and that lack of judgment to other people's risks, to the risks that they are taking. But I will say, like, in the Wasatch, you know, if you're skiing a slope at the end of the day and the wet slide comes and takes out a bunch of cars, like, that's a little bit of a different story. So you do want to watch out for, like, what's below you, and make sure you're not threatening other parties or, you know, major road infrastructure, because those wet slides, they can get out of control faster than you realize.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. That is different, right? The whole idea of risk, the way we're talking about it, is
Yeah.
risk that we assume for ourselves, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that should be a personal choice. But the way the backcountry is today, not only in the Wasatch, but in a lot of places from the Sierras to the Tetons, all these places that now there's so many impacts to one another and to roads and other things like that. That's a totally different situation. And you're absolutely right. We have to see the community aspect in there. And if you want to have that like true backcountry experience, then you need to be going where there aren't any other people. And that's an environment in which you can say, well, you know, I'm going to choose to risk this much for this mission. And that's really different. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, but that point you made, though, that has really stuck with me, is about that compassion and kindness, because there's so many new people getting out into the backcountry this year, which is super exciting. And you know, I think with that there comes like a little bit of, and I don't mean to do it in like a preachy way, but I was curious, like, what are some ways that we can inspire and educate new skiers about avalanche safety and backcountry ethics, without being too judgy or like without talking down to people, because we want to make an inclusive backcountry community.
Yeah, we really do, because it's the only one we got, you know, and it is going to be a reflection of how we treat each other out there. And ultimately, like, the backcountry could be crowded and we could make peace with that. Or it could be a very aggressive and unpleasant experience for all of us, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's just like such an important point. And you know, I guess what I want to bring is you know, our culture has become so driven by the idea of like success in the mountains, and success looks like certain things, and you ski certain things, and they should be steep, and they should be gnarly, and they should be this and that.
Right.
And I want to really get back to, for myself, and this is my process coming back from an accident, is I want to get back to a place where like I'm going into the mountains in search of a wilderness experience. Like, I just am a human being traveling in a place that is my natural habitat, and I feel at home there, and I feel the wind on my face, and you know, the sunburn on my nose, and the sense of solitude, and whatever it is that I can appreciate about being out in nature. And start there, and start with seeking that experience rather than being obsessed with a line, or even being obsessed with skiing powder or certain kind of snow and not other kind of snow. It's like, if we can all get back to seeking nature, which is what the whole point is, then we can enter into the mountains with a level of respect that is commensurate with it being nature, with it being wilderness, with it being wild, with it being a place where we don't control it. And then when we go in with that attitude and we try to create a culture around that, it's much easier to talk about risk and to talk about uncertainty, because it's nature, and nature doesn't care about whether we survive it or not. It's just there. And
Wow.
that's
Yeah.
kind of the vibe that I'm really trying to cultivate.
That's super cool. One of my another mentor woman I really look up to, her name is Rue Mapp, and she's like the founder of Outdoor Afro. And she once told me, it's like people get so caught up in like these vanity metrics, you know, like how many lines have I climbed, or how many summits, or how many likes is this video gonna get on Instagram of my like POV footage. And I think what you said really speaks to that, to be like engaged and immersed in the experience rather than being caught up in all those vanity metrics, which at the end of the day, they don't really matter.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great way to put it. And for me, that's making it easier for me to like make peace with changes in the mountains and changes in the way I'm approaching the mountains. If I'm not so obsessed with like certain pieces of terrain, but rather just like a certain kind of experience where I come home, my body's tired, I'm kind of worked, and you know, I navigated through the wilderness. Well, that then, you know, I'm good. That did it.
Yeah, that's great. I love that feeling. And yeah, I think that's the best part about winter. It just really reminds you too of just like the fragility of human life, you know, that we're not superior to nature, but we're part of it. And that vulnerability, I think, is what makes me want to keep going back out. And so on that note, like what are some ways that people can increase their mountain, expand their knowledge and their mountain education?
Well, you know, I think nature reveals itself slowly, right? And if we choose terrain that's appropriate for our level of experience, then we have the time to have nature reveal itself, and to see like when the wind picks up and it feels cold on this side of my face, that corresponds with snow feeling like this over here and feeling like that over there. And when the snow feels like this over there and I ski through it, it cracks. And when it cracks, sometimes it breaks off, you know, and you learn like nature has all these patterns. And when we like go in with that naturalist mindset and like just really clued in and trying to observe, then we are open to like seeing all that patterning in nature and being an avalanche expert, if there is even such a thing, which I think is like a crazy idea really. It just means really that like you are a more in tune naturalist. You're better able to interpret what you observe in nature. When the snow is getting shook off the trees, you can take that as an observation, but then you can extrapolate from that. You can say, my guess is that might mean this. And when the sun's beating down on the face and snow is turning to water and it's dripping off the rocks, you interpret like what that means and whether that is driving a process that's more towards stability or more towards instability, and more answers your question of whether you can survive being in that environment. It's just about being a good naturalist. It's just about cluing in. It's just about like smelling the flowers and seeing what's going on and like noticing, talking, you know, like, Caroline, did you hear that? Because it kind of felt like a collapse to me.
Yeah.
You know, no, I didn't hear that. Okay, well, let's keep going, you know.
Yeah.
And that's what we got to do, right? We just got to clue into what's going on and bringing that quiet, curious state of mind into the mountains, and then we're tuned in.
Yeah. Yeah. I spent a lot of years just walking around the snow in the resort before I ever ventured into the backcountry, because like, I mean, I was pretty scared to go in the backcountry, but then one of the things I learned from some of my courses is like your observations, they don't start like when you head out on the skin track. It's like I'm driving up it's like the minute I walk out my door, I'm seeing how the snow is on my windshield. Is it heavy? Is it light? Is it easy to brush off, or is it hard? And is there a layer on top? And then driving up the canyon, you know, you can get a lot of clues by looking in to see if there have been recent avalanches or looking for signs of wind. And so I think when you spend a lot of time in the snow, it just becomes part of you, and you just learn to know it in a different way.
Yeah, and that's such a fun process, right? That's like
Yeah.
such a enjoyable part of being a skier, is like you have that time to like listen and hear and feel and sense and guess. That's all we do. We just guess, right? We're good. We get good at guessing, but it's never perfect. And, you know, some of the best skiing experiences, and maybe you found this too, because I know you've done this a lot, is when you go on those extended trips where you're camping day after day and you wake up and you're just completely surrounded by it every day. And as those trips wear on, those are like the most magic moments where like you've had no other distractions, no other input except for what you have observed in nature. And you find this like higher level of connection to the environment, and you're a better guesser of where the snow is going to be good, and, you know, where is it going to be slabby, and where is it going to be pow, and where might there be a cornice, and how do I avoid the crust, you know, and is that going to be filled in, and like all those things, you figure all that stuff out because you're just like cluing in all the time. And sometimes what's hard now is that, you know, the portrayal of the backcountry experience in the media is all of what's portrayed is the most high risk type of skiing. So the perception is I've got to get there right away. And it's like, no, you should spend years wandering around in the woods, because that's where you will hone that skill without risking killing yourself, because the margins are bigger there. You can be wrong more in lower angle terrain. And that's how you'll develop that love for the mountains, love for nature, and that ability to interpret what she's saying.
Absolutely. And as much as I love going to new mountain ranges and to work on different projects there, I love doing the same routes over and over in my backyard. You know, like I don't really get that bored of certain lines. Like I could ski them hundreds of times and I try not to let that familiarity become a risk, because sometimes you get too comfortable and then you don't see things the right way. But there is something about just traveling those same lines over and over, and you know exactly how the avalanches happen. And yeah, I think it's just, I have a love of that as well, of just the repetition. And so
Totally.
the other thing I was going to say is like, well, I wanted to bring it back now to your film, because I know you spend a lot of time working on film and photo shoots, and I spend a lot of time doing that as well. And you know, some of my favorite moments are when you're just waiting for the sucker hole and you're just watching the clouds go by and trying to predict when to drop in. But so Solving for Z, like this is a huge film, super cool. What was watching the film like for you?
That's an interesting question. Well, you know, like obviously I was so immersed in the project for the summer really, and even into the early fall. So, you know, we were going back and forth and refining these little parts of it, really just from like the story point of view, and like, you know, are we communicating, you know, what I want to put out there. And then when that process culminated and finished, it was about a month before the film actually released.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the final version of the film, but I really didn't watch it. I just needed to like put it to bed, and it was just like, you know, it just is what it is now. Like you've got to, like it's not perfect. Like that's not the film I intended to make. Obviously, I didn't intend to get avalanched and almost kill myself in the making of a film. So it was really, really difficult to even want to carry on with the film project. And if I'd had it my way at times, I would have just hit pause and been like, let's pursue this another year. But, you know, on the other hand, it's like, well, that is the real story.
Yeah.
And there's no better way to tell a story about risk than to like reveal all of your own mistakes. And not, you know, I was going to tell a film about the mistakes I made 10 years ago. And that felt pretty safe. Like, oh yeah, I can, you know, talk about these lessons I learned. And now I'm like old guy and I can look back and, you know, well, no, like it's not that at all. Like, screwing up right now, almost kill myself. So let's just talk about that right there and then. And yeah, going back to see it when it went live, it was quite intense, you know. But it was also quite a relief that, you know, now it's like, okay, I've thought this through, I've hashed this out, and now here you go, world, boom, there it is. Make of it what you will. That's my story, you know.
Yeah.
Good with it.
Yeah, so those of you that want to watch it, maybe Z, you can tell folks how to watch it.
Yeah, it's just available on YouTube. just like
Yeah.
YouTube solving for Z.
Solving for Z. So I highly recommend giving it a watch. Yeah, I know, like when I watch sometimes films, especially ones that are really emotional, like every time I watch them about myself, like I cry, even though I've seen it and I lived through it, like I still cry. And
Yeah, yeah.
there's
Get
such
that.
power in that vulnerability, and it's so brave and awesome of you to like open up and put it all out there, because I think stories like that can really help to connect the snow science and all of the stuff that we're trying to learn to like what it really means to, as a human.
Yeah, I mean, hats off to you too, Caroline. You've absolutely led the way with, embracing that whole idea of like being real and being honest and being vulnerable and letting other people's, distaste for the way you've done something, just accept that. Like, yeah, that's the feeling other people have had. I'm okay with it. This is who I am. I'm gonna be who I am. And yeah. But for me, I did anticipate that there would be more like judgment, and
Mm.
and maybe there has been. I just haven't really experienced it, and that's been kind of nice, of course.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
really nice. I'm
yeah,
I'm glad to hear that though, because like I'm really excited about the future of the backcountry ski community, where it's like we're not bullying and we're not harassing each other over these things, that it's like acceptance and love and kindness and compassion, because like we're not going to change the culture by bullying each other, or we're not going to make like this resilient community if we're bullies to each other. And so I'm really glad to hear that you've had a good experience, because
yeah.
the film is so powerful. And I think we have time for one more question. So one of the questions that was submitted was, how does the equation of risk change in the pandemic, or does it?
Yeah, that is a great question that I don't feel terribly well prepared to answer because, I had surgery the week of the pandemic started, like
Yeah.
March 10th or 15th. And then I've been injured and out of commission entirely all summer, all fall, and I'm just getting back into the mountains over the last month.
Yeah.
So, that's a great question. And, I think that those of you who were out in the mountains in March and April and May really had to reckon with that as the world was shutting down and there was just so much turmoil. And then you're out doing your thing. And does this even make sense? Is this fair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's and it's a moving target, because
Yeah.
the pandemic is affecting different places at different times. And so in California, the ICU capacity might be, or in LA, it might be completely different than it is in Utah or in Wyoming. And so, yeah, I think it's a moving target, and it's a hard question. And again, like, I just encourage to go back to the theme, I guess, is just encourage people to bring like compassion and not judgment to each other, because
Yeah.
it's really easy to get judgy. So, cool. Well, let me see. Maybe we can do one more. That was a pretty quick one. So, what do you hope your story inspires others to think about and look out for?
I think what I'm really feeling right now is this idea that if we all as a culture and a community have to recognize that going into the mountains is a risky thing, and it will always be a risky thing. And the part of what makes it special is the risk, because the risk is connected to this uncertainty, right? That we choose an environment that doesn't make any promises, that's not scripted, it's not protected, it's not safe, it's not supposed to be safe. And that is why we seek it, and that is what it brings to our life. So coming up with these ideas that I see floating around where people are very judgmental, it's connected to this idea that if you know what you're doing, you won't get hurt.
Right.
And that is a terrible idea that has no basis in reality. And what I hope to bring is a respect for the mountains, because if we respect that the mountains are wilderness and that they are wild, that they change, that they are uncertain, and that we as human beings are not capable of completely decoding them. Snow is three-dimensional, and most of what we really care about is actually happening below the surface. That's not something we can know. It's only something we can guess at. Like, how much friction is holding the slab in the weak layer? I don't know, you know? And when we embrace that it is uncertain, that there is risk, then it's much more conducive to a culture of humility and compassion, and more of a sense of community around, like, hey, yeah, we're all in this together, because none of us have this figured out. Not the guides, not the avalanche experts, not anybody. Like, we're all just choosing wilderness. We're choosing risk, and risk is special. We don't get to have that kind of risk in nature in much of our life. And holy smokes, it's really pretty awesome. It's really a pretty powerful part of being a human being.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a comment come in and it says, seems obvious, but please encourage people to support their local AVI forecast groups and take AVI 1 and 2 courses. And so I just wanted to echo that. And yeah, your summary was so amazing. So thank you so much, Z. So do you want to tell people where they can follow you and give a shout out for
Sure.
Samsara?
Yeah, sure. So Samsara Experience, I think this is the account I'm on now. This is yeah, this is our platform for talking about all things mountains and training, and our passion for both. So yeah, we'd love to connect with you here.
Great.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you can follow me on my page at Caroline Gleich, Gleich. And thank you so much, Backcountry, for letting us have this chat here and holding this space. And keep in touch, everyone. Thanks, Z. Hope to share with you sometime soon. Okay,
I hope
bye.
so. Bye-bye.